My grandmother kept a recipe box on the kitchen counter her whole life, wooden painted pale blue with a small latch that never quite closed right. Inside were index cards written in her looping cursive, chicken soup, lemon pound cake, the pie crust she made every Thanksgiving. When she died, I assumed I'd inherit it, not because I was greedy, because she told me I would. She looked me in the eyes 2 weeks before the stroke and said, "That box goes to you, sweetheart. You're the one who actually cooks." I'm telling you this because the box is how everything started. My name is Vivienne. No, wait. I've been calling myself that in my head for 3 years, the person who survived this. My real name doesn't matter as much as what happened. What matters is that I'm 31 years old, I work as a pediatric occupational therapist, and I have a younger sister named, I'll call her what she called herself, the favorite. Everyone else called her Margot, and for most of my life I let that arrangement stand without fighting it. Our mother ran the house on perception, what the neighbors thought, what the church ladies whispered, what showed up on the Christmas card. My sister Margot was photogenic, socially easy, the kind of person who remembered birthdays and said the right thing at funerals. I was quieter. I read too much. I asked too many questions at the dinner table. Our father once told me, half laughing, that I had a gift for making people uncomfortable. He meant it as a compliment. I don't think it landed that way. When Grandma Cecile died, I was 27. The grief hit me in waves at the grocery store, in the car, folding laundry. She had been the one adult in my childhood who didn't seem annoyed by me. She taught me to make pie crust with cold butter. She let me stay up late reading when I visited. She called me on my birthday at exactly 7 a.m. because that's when I was born, and she never once forgot. The funeral was a Thursday. By Saturday, Margot had already been to my mother's house twice. I didn't think anything of it at first. Grief makes people need their families. I understood that, but on the third visit, my cousin, the only honest person in our extended family, I'll call her by what everyone calls her, Bex. No wait, that name's taken. My cousin, the blunt one, texted me from across the room at my aunt's house. "Your sister just asked your mom about the recipe box." I felt something shift in my chest. Not alarm exactly, more like recognition. Like when you hear a sound in the dark and your body knows what it is before your brain catches up. I texted back, "What did Mom say?" She replied 3 minutes later, "She said she'd think about it." That was 6 months before the lawsuit. Here's what you need to understand about my family. Nothing was ever said directly. Decisions happened in whispers, in parking lots, in phone calls I wasn't on. I found out my grandmother had changed her will, or rather, that someone had helped her change her will. The same way I found out most things in that family. Someone let something slip. It was my aunt, my grandmother's sister, who told me. She called on a Tuesday evening and she sounded tired. "I don't know what's right anymore," she said, "but I think you should know that the documents your mother brought to the notary the week before Cecile's stroke, those weren't the documents Cecile had on file with her attorney." I sat down on my kitchen floor. Slowly. "The way you sit down when your legs decide before you do." "What do you mean?" "Your grandmother had a will, honey. She'd had it for 11 years. She left you the recipe box and her sewing machine and the writing desk from her bedroom. She left your sister the jewelry and the china. Equal split of the savings." She paused. "The notary document your mother filed after the stroke. It left everything liquid to Margot and named your mother executor with full discretionary authority. The stroke had left my grandmother unable to speak clearly, unable to write. She died 6 weeks later, still in the hospital, her hand curling around mine in a way that I now understood differently than I had before. I did not fall apart. I want to say that clearly. I know what you might expect me to say, that I collapsed, that I cried for days, that I called my mother screaming. I didn't do any of that. I sat on my kitchen floor for a long time, and then I stood up, and I called a probate attorney. Her name was a formality. What mattered was that she had 30 years of experience with contested estates in our state, and an office that smelled like old coffee and organized files, and she had a way of listening that made me feel like nothing I said was strange or small. I told her everything. The original will. The timing. My grandmother's condition at the time of the notary visit. The recipe box that was supposed to be mine. The attorney told me that what I was describing, if accurate, was a potential case for undue influence, that there were things we could do, but she also told me, carefully, that it would take time, documentation, and patience, and that cases like this often grew complicated in ways that were hard to predict. "Do you have anything in writing?" she asked. "Anything your grandmother said? Anything your mother or sister said? Anything that establishes the original intent?" I thought about it. "My grandmother wrote me a letter," I said. "About a year ago. She was having a good day. She liked to write letters on her good days. She mentioned the recipe box specifically. She mentioned the writing desk. She mentioned that she'd already taken care of it with her attorney." The attorney looked at me. "Where is that letter?" "In my apartment," I said. "In the box where I keep important things." She nodded slowly. "That letter matters. I went home that night and found the letter. I read it 3 times. Grandma Cecile's looping cursive, the same as the recipe cards. I've already spoken with my attorney, so you don't have to worry. The things I want you to have will come to you. I know you'll use them." She'd underlined, "You'll use them." That was so like her, underlining instead of explaining. I photographed the letter. I sent the photograph to my attorney. I kept the original in 2 separate protective sleeves and stored 1 copy at a friend's apartment across the city. Then I waited. My mother called me the following week. She had the voice she uses when she's pretending the conversation is casual. Slightly too warm, slightly too bright. She told me she'd been going through Grandma Cecile's things and that she'd found the recipe box. "I thought maybe Margot should have it," she said. "She has kids, you know. She'll actually use it with them." I let a beat pass. "Mom," I said carefully, "Grandma told me the box was mine." "Oh, honey." A small laugh. "You know how she was toward the end?" She said a lot of things. That was the moment I understood exactly what we were dealing with. I didn't argue. I said I had to go, and I got off the phone, and I texted my attorney. "The conversation just happened. Do you want me to write down what was said?" She wrote back within the hour. "Yes. Exact words, time, date. Keep everything." Margot called me 3 days later. This was unusual. We weren't close, hadn't been since our early 20s, but we maintained a surface civility that our mother required. Her voice had a texture I recognized from childhood. A particular lightness that meant she thought she was winning something. "I just wanted to check in," she said. "I know this has been hard." "It has," I said. "I think Mom's been really stressed about all the estate stuff." She paused. "She's doing her best." "I'm sure she is," I said. There was a longer pause. "Then, you're not going to make this difficult, are you?" I said nothing for a moment. Then I said, "I just want what Grandma intended." She laughed. It was a short laugh. Grandma wasn't really in a position to intend anything, toward the end. I let that sentence live in the air for a second. Then I said I had to go, and I ended the call, and I sat very still for a long time. I did not know yet that Margot had been texting our mother throughout that call. I didn't know that those texts still existed. I didn't know that one of them said, almost word for word, "She's going to be difficult. We should move the accounts before she finds an attorney." I found out later. I found out because discovery is a real process, and documents are real things, and people who think they've been careful often haven't been. The months that followed were the quietest of my adult life. I went to work. I did my job. 6-year-olds learning to hold pencils. 8-year-olds figuring out how their bodies move through space. I came home. I kept detailed notes of every conversation. I spoke to my attorney regularly. I did not speak to my mother or my sister any more than I had to, and when I did, I kept my voice even and my words careful. My mother threw Margot a birthday dinner in March. I was invited, the way you're invited to things and families like mine, a text that assumes attendance and doesn't ask. I went. I wore a blue dress and I brought a bottle of wine and I sat at the table where I'd sat at holidays my whole life, and I watched my mother serve Margot the first plate and pour her the first glass, and I felt nothing that surprised me. What did surprise me was my aunt. Not the blunt one who'd called me in September, a different aunt, my mother's younger sister, who I'd always found difficult to read. She sat across from me and she watched the evening with an expression I couldn't quite name. Partway through dinner, while Margot was in the kitchen helping our mother, she leaned across the table and said quietly, "For what it's worth, I was there when Cecile told your mother about the will, the real one. I heard the whole conversation." I looked at her carefully. "Would you be willing to say that anywhere else?" She looked at her wine glass. She was quiet for a long moment. "I might be," she said, "if it came to that." I told my attorney the next morning. The case was filed in May. Undue influence. Fraud upon an incapacitated person. The original will, my grandmother's letter, and my aunt's willingness to testify. Together, they were more than enough to get us through the door of a courtroom. Margot was named as a party. So was my mother. I don't think either of them believed it would actually go anywhere. I know this because Margot texted me 2 weeks after the filing, the last text she ever sent me, that said, "This is embarrassing and pointless and you should drop it." I screenshotted it and forwarded it to my attorney. The texts between Margot and my mother, the ones from the day Margot called me, were recovered during discovery. So were emails. My mother had used her personal email account, the one she'd had since 2009, for almost all of it. Long, detailed emails to Margot about the accounts, about the timeline, about what to say if anyone asked. One email, sent the day after my grandmother's stroke, contained a specific list of assets with a note that said, "We need to move on this before she recovers or anyone gets involved." She hadn't deleted any of them. My attorney read them to me over the phone, one afternoon in October, with the measured tone of someone who had seen a lot in 30 years. But even she paused after the last one. "This is," she said, and then stopped. "This is clear." The hearing was in November. I flew back to my hometown on a Wednesday. I stayed in a hotel instead of with family, which is something I would have felt guilty about once and didn't anymore. I wore gray, not because I planned to, just because it's what I reached for in the morning. I had coffee alone at the hotel restaurant, and I watched the street outside, and I thought about my grandmother's kitchen on Sunday mornings, the smell of it, the light through those particular windows. I walked into the courtroom, and I sat down and I waited. Margot came in with my mother and their attorney, talking quietly. She was wearing something expensive. Her hair was done. She looked the way she always looked, composed, presentable, the person from the Christmas card. She was scanning the room the way people do when they're nervous, but trying not to show it. And then she saw me. Her face didn't freeze exactly. It was more like it recalibrated, like a screen that flickers before it loads. She hadn't expected me to be there. I'm not sure what she had expected. That I'd filed the lawsuit and then stayed home? That I'd let my attorney handle everything from a distance? I had thought about not coming. My attorney had said it was my choice. But it wasn't really a choice. My grandmother had told me the box was mine. I needed to be in the room. Margot sat down. She did not look at me again. The hearing went the way that legal proceedings go, methodically, without drama, with long stretches of document review and procedural language. My aunt testified. My attorney presented the emails. The original will was entered into the record. The letter in my grandmother's cursive was read aloud, and I kept my eyes on the table in front of me because I didn't trust what my face would do. My mother's attorney argued that my grandmother had been of diminished capacity and that the notary document reflected her true wishes expressed in private. He said the original will was out of date. He said my aunt's memory was unreliable. The judge was a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses that she pushed up her nose several times during the proceedings. She asked precise questions. She did not editorialize. She read through the emails slowly from the beginning, and when she reached the one about moving the assets before anyone got involved, she read it a second time. The ruling came the following Monday in writing. Undue influence was found. The notary document was voided. The estate was to be distributed according to the original will, with the additional finding that legal costs were to be borne by the defendants. My mother was removed as executor. An independent administrator was appointed. My attorney called me when the ruling came through. She read me the key language. I sat in my apartment at my kitchen table, and I listened to her read. And when she finished, I said, "Is that it?" "That's it," she said. I didn't hear from Margot. I didn't hear from my mother. I didn't expect to. We haven't spoken since, and I've stopped expecting that to change. The recipe box is on my kitchen counter now. Pale blue, wooden, with a latch that never quite closes. The index cards are exactly as I remembered them. My grandmother's cursive on each one, the cards soft at the edges from years of handling. I've cooked my way through some of them. The lemon pound cake. The soup. I made the pie crust at Thanksgiving, with cold butter the way she taught me. It's a small thing, a recipe box. I know that. It was never really about the money, though the money mattered. I won't pretend otherwise. It was about what my grandmother meant when she handed me something and said, "This is for you." It was about whether that meant anything, whether the people who were supposed to protect her had, whether a document and a letter and an aunt willing to tell the truth were enough to make it count. They were enough. The writing desk is in my bedroom now, by the window. I do my journaling there in the mornings, in the early light before I go to work. Sometimes I think about my grandmother writing her letters at her own desk, on her good days, in her looping cursive, underlining things instead of explaining them. I think she knew I'd find a way to hold on to them. That's the thing about the truth. It doesn't need to shout. It just needs to survive long enough to be heard. I keep thinking about my mother's email. Not the content of it. I've memorized that. But the fact that she sent it from an account she'd had since 2009, on a regular Tuesday the way you'd send a grocery list. She didn't think it would matter. She didn't think anyone would ever read it in a room with a judge present. That gap between what people believe they can get away with and what actually holds up, that's where this whole story lived. What I've come to understand, sitting at that writing desk in the mornings, is that the outcome of this wasn't luck. It was a sequence. My grandmother wrote a letter on a good day and underlined the things she meant. I kept that letter in a protective sleeve. My aunt, who had been quiet most of her life, decided one dinner that she was done being quiet. My attorney asked the right questions in the right order. None of those things happened by accident. They happened because each person, at the moment it counted, chose to do the harder thing instead of the easier one. That's what I think about when people ask me how I got through it. I didn't have more resources than my mother or my sister. I didn't have connections or leverage. What I had was a clear enough sense of what was right that I couldn't talk myself out of it. My grandmother meant for me to have those things. I knew that. And once I knew it, the question was never whether to fight. It was only how carefully. There's something I want to say about patience, because I think people misunderstand it. Patience isn't waiting and hoping. It's continuing to do the precise, unglamorous work. The notes after every phone call, the emails to the attorney, the documentation of things said in passing, while the part of you that wants to scream stays quiet and focused. It took 14 months from my aunt's phone call to the written ruling. 14 months of going to work, making dinner, keeping records, not tipping my hand. That's not a personality trait. It's a decision you make every single day. And the intelligence it takes. I don't mean test scores. I mean the kind of clarity that lets you read a situation accurately without letting your emotions scramble the signal. When my sister called and said, "You're not going to make this difficult, are you?" every part of me wanted to respond to the emotional content of that sentence, to the dismissal in it, the assumption. But I learned by then to listen past the feeling and hear the information. She was scared. She was checking. That sentence told me more than she intended it to, and I used what it told me. My grandmother never fought anyone. She just kept her will with a real attorney and wrote letters on her good days, and trusted that the truth would be findable if anyone ever needed to find it. That's its own kind of wisdom. Not dramatic, not loud, but durable in a way that outlasted everything my mother and sister built on top of it. The recipe box is still on my counter. The latch still doesn't close all the way. I've stopped trying to fix it. Some things hold together fine without being sealed shut.